fuck's sake, I'm glad they canceled this storyline and characters. Just let RVB die. Please stop parading around its corpse. It feels like with every season or new story arc, the show gets worse and worse. And when we think it's hit rock bottom, the next season comes along and shows us that it can sink further. Poor old Yeller is practically decaying at this point. Please, just put the thing down already. Well, looks like they took my advice. Not only did they decide to end Red vs. Blue, but the whole company. Maybe you should have listened to those armchair CEOs.
Y'all motherfuckers just want to watch Rome burn.
More like we saw Rome was on fire, tried to warn those living there, and got repeatedly told everything's fine. Then when everything inevitably burned down, all the people were somehow confused.
How good is that?
When everyone else was like,
well, duh.
Didn't need a business degree to see where this was all headed.
The future of Rooster Teeth.
Bankrupt, probably.
You can't say we didn't warn you. Now, I don't really want to get into why this all collapsed. We'd be here all day. I just find it interesting that this final season of RVB finished production right as Warner Brothers decided to pull the plug on the company, making Restoration not only the final Red vs. Blue season, but the final project the company put out before shutting down. How fitting. I guess time truly is made out of circles. The teaser trailer for Restoration had a lot of promise. It seemed to be taking the characters, world, and plot a little more seriously again. That there was actually some thought behind it, as opposed to...
It's made to be super light. Like, if you watch this, you watch the trailer, you watch something, and you're like, oh, that's cheesy. Yes. It probably... I probably wrote cheesy in parentheses in the document.
Not a great plan.
What really excited me was that Bernie was returning to write it, with Matt directing.
Well, it's about time.
Dad finally came home with the cigarettes he said he was getting.
I was someone who wrote Red vs. Blue for years and years and years, and I plan to go back to writing after the stuff I'm working on now.
It took you long enough.
A day I never thought would actually happen.
There are those who said this day would never come. What are they to say now?
Though it has been over 10 years since Bernie helmed the season, could be a little rusty, but hey, at least it can't be any worse than Zero, right? Right? Yes, it's better. I'm not even going to entertain the idea it wasn't. But, it's got some issues though.
Oh, come on! What the hell?
Yeah, sorry. This ain't going to be one of those videos talking about my childhood and how meaningful this season was to me, while the track from the end of season 13 plays. This season has a lot of issues, and if I'm being honest, it's definitely far from the best. Dare I say, I think it's probably in the camp of bad seasons, but not as bad as the rest of them. It's probably fair to say it's the best of the worst. I'm not going to run through the plot beat by beat like I did with Zero. This video is going to be my thoughts on certain aspects of the season that are grouped together in a way that will hopefully flow nicely. Massive spoilers ahead. To start off, let's talk about the biggest part of Restoration. That's also one of its biggest missteps. Tucker becoming another version of the meta. If you haven't seen the season, since Church deconstructed himself into the different fragments to help power Tucker's suit, those fragments took control of Tucker the same way the fragments of the Alpha took control of Agent Main, turning Tucker into a new version of the meta. Cool idea, but there's some issues with it. One, it means Tucker himself barely has a presence. The only time we actually see him back to normal is the one scene at the end where he wakes up confused at what happened, and the short post-credit scene. I know he wasn't in Reconstruction and the back half of Recreation, but those weren't the final seasons of the show. Since this is the last chance we'll ever get to see any of these characters again, it would have been nice to see him more. That being said, if the story was worth it, then maybe I would feel a little differently about it. Which leads nicely into number 2, Tucker being the meta was severely wasted. If you remove the fact that Tucker is the meta, and instead have it be some random guy, what fundamentally changes about the season? The meta would still be after Caboose, since the fragments think the recordings of Church in his helmet are actually their memories? It doesn't make a lot of sense, I'm not getting into that. I guess Meta wouldn't know to find them at Blood Gulch in the third act? It certainly doesn't impact any of the characters' motivations to stop Meta. Caboose is only interested because Church is telling him to, plus Meta will be coming for him anyway. Sarge, I guess, is technically motivated by Tucker being the meta, but not in a substantial character way.
The upside is you might get to kill the most powerful blue soldier of all time, which would of course officially make you...
We'll get into this later. The only hint of exploring the idea of the villain of the season being one of them is the exchange with Caboose and the Staff of Charon ship. That's it. It's never dealt with deeper or even really brought up again. Then at the end, when Tucker is saved, we don't get to see him reconcile with the fact he was forced to kill people, including Sarge. He can't remember anything that happened, so he has no trauma, which I understand, it being the final season and all. Not a lot of time to deal with all that while also having things end on a positive note. It feels like this idea of the deconstructed fragments of Epsilon recreating what the deconstructed fragments of the Alpha did to Maine, to Tucker, is something that shouldn't have been told in just a single season. It should have probably gotten its own multi-season arc. Shame there was never an opportunity to give this idea the time and budget it deserved.
The story of Tucker going crazy and from Church's mistake of giving him the AI, that was what I left on the table and pitched for a potential season 15.
So you're telling me that this was the original idea for season 15, which any fan of RVB who was tasked with writing the show would take and fucking run with? They instead went with the blues and reds and retarded time-traveling space gods?
I said for 15, this is the direction. If I was doing this, I would head in this. They decided to go in a different direction.
For fuck's sake, why was this idea thrown out? I've always hated those seasons, especially 16 and 17, but now I fucking despise them. Knowing what could have been, with all the time and budget those seasons got.
This is unfucking believable.
It's actually, very condensed. It would have been like a trilogy of trying to save and defeat Tucker at the same time.
This might be a hot take, but I'm not that big of a fan of 13's ending. Perhaps one day I'll get into why. But I have to admit that this would have been a perfect way to follow up that season. The biggest thing I liked about the Chorus trilogy is that there was an actual attempt to build off the characters, world, and tone of the original 10 seasons. And this idea sounds like it would have fallen in line with that, as opposed to, well, time travel and gods. But before we throw Joe Nicolosi under the bus for rejecting this idea, I think there's a good chance Miles might have actually been the one to reject it. One, because he wanted to safeguard his ending. If Church created another version of the meta by doing what he did, then Miles could see that as taking away from Church's heroic sacrifice. And two, Bernie did have the idea of bringing back the meta for the Chorus trilogy that Miles was against. So it got reworked into Tucker getting the meta suit at the end of 13.
This whole thing, Bernie and I, when I was working on season 11, when we were talking about how this trilogy was going to go, Bernie told me, he's like, I want to bring back the meta. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm not really the biggest fan of bringing back characters that I feel like got everything that they deserved and they should be laid down. But then he started explaining here's why I think we should do it, and after a bunch of talks and a few tweaks and changes, we ended up with the ending that we went with for this season.
So maybe he still didn't want to bring back the meta and shot down the idea before Joe was even brought on board to write season 15. Despite not writing and directing RVB anymore, he still oversaw the show from a writing standpoint. Or, I could be wrong and Joe was floated the idea, but his response was,
"Nah, I've got an even much better idea.
Imagine the possibilities! I could create an entire race of beings with butts for faces. And faces for butts! Ah! Magnificent!
That was really bad.
The entire Wash and Doc story was pointless and stupid. I don't understand why this plot needed to be here and executed in the way it was. For those who didn't watch the season, Wash is suffering from PTSD after something happened on Chorus. So Wash spends most of the story in a hospital on Chorus talking to Doc. He sees the meta is back and wants to leave, but Dr. Gray, the psycho chick from the Chorus trilogy, won't let him go, thinking he's gone crazy. Until Doc is somehow able to get him out. They also somehow know the Reds, Caboose, and Meta are at Blood Gulch. Wash jumps off the cliff to injure himself to activate his recovery beacon so Carolina would show up, like a summon in a video game, instead of just reaching out to her and telling her the meta is back.
And next time, you don't need to jump off a cliff. Just call.
This is a criticism for both Wash and the Reds. Why didn't they just call her before? If Bernie didn't want another character tacking around for the plot, then he could have just had a throwaway line that she's busy or that they can't get a hold of her. Something. You'd think she'd have a vested interest in a new version of the meta coming after the Reds and Blues. Her new family collapsing the same way the Project Freelancer agents did. Remember her vision from season 13?
I told you when I went through the gateway that I saw the Freelancers. I had to watch them die, and after they were gone, I saw all of you. Wash, Tucker, the Reds, Church. I can't lose another family.
Anyway, after the meta is defeated, it's revealed that Wash was hallucinating Doc the entire time. And possibly even the hospital?
I feel like the way that you approached it when you directed it was, that hospital is like you don't even know what the hospital is. When I was watching it for the first time, it's like, it could appear that the hospital is almost like a false reality, like Wash is trapped somewhere. There's Dutch camera angles and things like that.
Apparently, during the battle to get off the ship at the end of season 13, Doc died trying to save Wash. That's why he was in the hospital with PTSD on Chorus. Why was this the B-plot you came up with? Why does this season, with its limited runtime and budget, even need a B-plot? How they use Wash this season is probably the lamest thing
Ever. Of all time.
they could do with him. It ate up time that could have gone to places in the story that needed it, built off a relationship from seasons ago that wasn't even that strong to begin with.
I hate you. I know.
Because they wanted to have the twist with Doc happen at the very end, it meant Wash had to be removed from everyone else and put in his own story, taken away from the main plot, where I feel like he would have been better utilized. There was a way for them to have their cake and eat it too. They could have still had this PTSD angle with Wash while having him a part of the main story. That would have even made the final scene with Wash hit a bit more. Plus, Doc doesn't have to die. You have Wash in hiding, or whatever the Reds and Caboose were doing at the start, with the main group. Concerned that after the battle on Chorus, Tucker was acting strange, then one day just disappeared. After Lopez finds the recordings of Church and Caboose's helmet, this could cause Wash to freak out, fearing that the new family he has found is starting to repeat the downfall of his previous one, seeing Tucker be manipulated the same way Maine was. This could cause him to start hallucinating the members of Freelancer he was close with, York, North, CT, Maine, throughout the season. Manifestations of his fear, antagonizing him. Those fears then starting to be made true by seeing the death of Sarge. Then when Meta is defeated and Tucker is saved, Wash could still feel guilt over what happened to Sarge. The conversation Carolina has with him could still be the same, obviously changing the stuff about Doc to fit Sarge's death. This way when Wash hallucinates the Freelancers one last time, it could have a bigger payoff since Wash has learned that his past isn't something he needs to fear and try to forget, but something to embrace and grow from, never truly letting the memories of them die. This whole storyline seems to suffer from the old M. Night Shyamalan problem, where it looks like Bernie thought up the twist first, then bent the story to make it work, instead of letting the story dictate what was best, wanting to recreate the brilliant twist at the end of season 6.
Red vs. Blue has a lot of twists in it. I was always most proud of reconstructions how the last word of the entire movie is a twist.
In order for this twist to work, it meant Wash had to be either stuck in a hospital or literally relegated to the sidelines, watching everyone else. Because if he'd interacted with the other characters sooner, the Doc twist wouldn't have worked. It'd be more obvious if more characters, who were interacting with Wash, weren't acknowledging Doc. Overall, the twist was not worth the potential character and story that could have been done. Since I brought up Sarge's death, let's talk about that. If told that one character was going to die in the final season, I think most RVB fans would guess Sarge. It's the obvious pick, and him dying to save a Blue is a fitting way for his character to go out, given where he started in the show.
The Blues never sleep. They're too busy plotting to destroy our way of life. That's how you can always spot a Blue, Donut. We're always the ones conniving and scheming. You know, at first I thought this cave was pretty dismal, but it's amazing how a couple of blue corpses can really spruce up the place.
But I didn't really like its execution, no pun intended. First, let's talk about Sarge this season in general. He seems to have been regressed back to like season 7, before his season 8 and 10 speeches. which to be fair wasn't the first season to do that. His motivation to help Caboose at first is the pride of defeating the
most powerful blue soldier of all time, which would of course officially make you...
Go on.
He then abandons Caboose to be killed when the meta sneak attacks and overpowers them, only to then come to the conclusion that Caboose is
one of us.
But I'm sorry, this shouldn't be a new revelation for him. Alright, the pun was intended that time. He had this realization back in that season. After learning that his
entire military career was a lie,
he decides to help Caboose save Church and Tex, now viewing the Blues as his allies, not enemies. Only to then reaffirm this new character change with his speech to Wash in Season 10.
There's one thing you freelancers always seem to forget. That's the fact that we've managed to kick your ass time and time again. Oh, sure, you've got all your smart plans and your fancy technology and your advanced training. But in the end, what has that got you? Without a team you can count on, without your fellow soldier by your side, all that really doesn't amount to squat, now does it?
And now, after having fought in actual war side by side with the Blues, during which he was on several missions with the Blues and no Reds and he didn't seem to mind. By this point in the series, which is after 13, now that seasons 15 to 0 aren't canon anymore. Thank God. Sarge should completely be over the Red and Blue conflict. The payoff of Sarge accepting Caboose as one of us doesn't work because Sarge has demonstrated multiple times he is willing to put his life on the line to help the Blues. Sarge should have been the first one on board with helping Caboose, like he was in Season 8, then convincing Simmons and Griff that they can't abandon Tucker.
One of us.
Sarge should have actually sacrificed himself to save Caboose, taking a bullet, or sword, for him, instead of getting stabbed in the back on their ship after already saving Caboose, elevating Sarge's growth from choosing to put his life at risk for the Blues to choosing to give his life for a Blue. This could cause them to want to finally retreat back to the ship, trapping the meta with a bubble shield and running away, dragging Sarge back with them so he can deliver his final speech, completely cutting out the Reds abandoning Caboose. This might have actually been the plan at first.
How Sarge gets away from Caboose and Meta, and then motivation for going back. That was something that was, just changed for time and everything else. At one point, I remember Sarge got hurt and they dragged him away and he decided to run back.
Yeah. But for some reason they decided to change it to this. In terms of Sarge's final speech, I do like the idea of it pushing Simmons and Griff's characters to be motivated to see the mission through, and what he said to Caboose and him giving Simmons the shotgun. My main issue is what he said to Griff. Again, I like the effect it had on Griff's character, motivating him to stay, even though he's been given the paperwork for his discharge. But Sarge telling Griff he always believed in him and was just trying to push him to do better comes across as way too sentimental to the point of feeling out of character. Sarge did not like or care for Griff at all.
Are you sure no one accidentally got shot in the face when someone else's shotgun just accidentally went off during the incredible distraction of a spaceship crash landing? Purely by coincidence?
I don't know.
No one orange?
Ugh, I'm fine. Sorry, sir.
Oh, mission accomplished. Excellent work, men. Let's hang up a banner.
There's Griff.
All right. And Griff. Hey, Griff. Catch this one.
No!
You catch that one? It's critical to keep a little padding in our stats. That way, if we're far enough ahead, I can stab Griff in the face and still stay in the lead.
You know, I'm standing right here.
Right where I want you. Within face-stabbing range. Griff is dead. It's a sad day. But he died as he lived, flat on his belly, trying to get someone else to do his work for him. He will be missed until we get a replacement. And then forgotten immediately. It's always been my wish to watch you die. Every night after you boys would retire to your bunks, I would climb up to the top of the base and just wait, hoping I would see a shooting star so that I could wish for your violent and unbearably painful demise. I even had a little jingle to go along with it. I just wish that Griff was dead.
I hate you.
You can still have a heartfelt speech with Sarge and Griff without straight up retconning their relationship. Just make it so that Sarge used to think these things about Griff, but has since changed his mind, that now he does see the potential in Griff. The obvious thing to use to justify this shift in perspective would be the war on Chorus.
Today is a good day to die.
Permission to speak freely, sir? Fuck that.
that Griff had the capability of actually being a soldier. This recognition from Sarge motivating Griff to see the mission through and help Simmons and Caboose, like a good soldier would, to prove to Sarge once and for all he
had the makings of a varsity athlete.
So those were the major problems I had with Restoration. I've also got some minor ones too. But before I get into them, I want to discuss the limitations the season had. I understand that Bernie had big ideas that then had to be shrunk down in order to produce it.
Well, I asked first Matt. I had all these ideas, and I said, Matt, what's the budget? And so then I cut out about 90% of the ideas.
Like I talked about earlier, the idea for this season was originally an idea Bernie came up with for a story arc of seasons that had to be trimmed down to fit the budget and runtime for the season. But I feel part of Bernie's job as a writer, and Matt's as the director of the project, is to come up with an idea you'd actually be able to execute with the means you have, within both budget and runtime. Especially RVB of all series, where the game, its assets, and limitations are what used to inspire the writing of the show. Turning objects in the game into characters, or repurpose them as other things, and building stories around the things on a map.
One of the first things that Bernie and I did when we first started talking about the 11th season was back to the basics. What is there in this new map that we can make fun of? You essentially told me what you did for the first 5 seasons of Red vs. Blue was you just looked around on the map and said, what do we have here? There's a tree, there's some caves, what's going on with these teleporters?
There's a skull.
There's a skull.
The whole Freelancer story came from Bernie writing a backstory to explain the armor abilities, like invisibility and overshields, from the original Halo multiplayer.
The Freelancer backstory with Tex in the Blood Gulch Chronicles started as a way to explain why there's invisibility, and where that stuff would come from. So we had this little organization that kind of developed that equipment. That's really the thing behind Project Freelancer, is the weird offshoot into the quote-unquote Halo universe, is that this was supposedly the group that invented equipment and made equipment. That's where we originally started with Project Freelancer, and then developed the whole AI thing and the different storylines that started in Reconstruction.
I, again, understand that.
I think it's the smallest crew we've had since Season 8.
But look what you were able to achieve with that season. You certainly didn't feel the limitations for that season. And that season only had 1 animator and 2 or 3 compositors, probably because Bernie was more involved in the production and would go back and forth with Monty.
My job essentially in this was, well, first of all, I would sit down with Monty and we'd talk about ideas that we want to do. And then Monty would go, we get a general idea, and then it was Monty goes, okay, I'm off. And then he'd go off and build sequences.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to come back in and fill in little gaps to glue shots together if that was needed.
Bernie gave me the leeway of we knew Text Fight was coming up, and Bernie's like, you handle it. And I'm like, I started handling it, and it's it made itself, but at the same time, some direction is good. So we went at about midway through, it's Bernie wrote a version, and while I was making a version, and we kind of met in the middle of some of the things. He would look at the scenes I've already made and write them. So I see a paragraph describing the thing I just made.
So it would fit into the storyline, exactly.
I feel like the process of writing this season, where Bernie just wrote the script, handed it off to the team, and said,
good luck,
might be why the limitations seem more apparent, because Bernie wouldn't be able to account for them when writing the script.
Went in and tried to tell the best story we possibly could. Matt's always great about just write whatever you want, and we'll figure out a way to make that work. I call it the beautiful lie. He says it to me every time we do any kind of script writing thing that he's going to direct.
Honestly, as cool as the idea of Tucker being used like main by the Epsilon fragments to recreate the meta is, I feel Bernie should have just come up with another idea for the final season, one that fit better within the limited budget and time. The season didn't have to do this whole biggest bad guy we've ever faced thing. All we wanted as fans was a fitting send-off to the characters we've been watching for 20 years. I would have been happy for a smaller scale, more character-focused final story, especially after how flashy, ridiculous, and devoid of any meaningful character the last 3 seasons felt. I feel like a good point of comparison would be how the Venture Brothers were forced to end. Not only are both final installments similar in length, and both series started the same year, but they too had to cut down the original version of a much bigger story they wanted to tell. For those who aren't familiar with the Venture Brothers, fucking watch it, it's amazing. The show was originally promised an 8th season. After the creators spent a lot of time working on it, fully outlining the season, and even having a few scripts written and turned into the network, WB canceled the show. Huh. Same parent company shutting them down too. Luckily, they were given an 80-minute direct-to-home movie to wrap everything they set up at the end of Season 7. However, this meant completely scrapping most of their plans for Season 8 and reworking the story to fit their new limited runtime.
When we started to write this, we were trying to kind of roll Season 8 into one episode, and then we just started going, can't be done, which was difficult for us. We had Season 8 figured out, and then we got to a point trying to cram it into an episode. We go, let's just reimagine this and rethink it and make one tight episode. I'm using the word tight. I'm not claiming this is tight, but we tried to make it work.
Now, the Venture Brothers movie did feel cramped, and they weren't able to tie up every single thread set up throughout the show.
Brock got a little bit of short shrift.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Of course. There were characters in this I wanted in, and we jammed in so many.
Yeah. But for like main guys.
But we dealt with
Brock could have got a little more to do. When and where did Rusty and Billy go when they time traveled? If suddenly somebody decided to make the show again, I could put that script into production tomorrow. Because also when we were talking about this idea for the season, I think we were going to eventually come around to the idea that the Hanks in his head are actually dead clone Hanks.
If there was a Season 8, you'd learn more about Scare Bear?
I did, in one of my episodes, start seeding. I did lay the groundwork in case we wanted to make him a future Hank.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah.
And, Scare Bear was going to have an appearance in this special.
We talked about it.
We didn't.
Scare Bear?
Yeah, he was
Don't
going to
kid yourself.
No, the pre-title sequence was.
Oh, you were going to drop him in.
I had to cut those 2 pages.
Let me tell you this.
The history of like Force Majeure and Jonas's rivalry.
If there was a Season 8, you would have had a whole episode on that.
It's true.
Yeah. It was a Force Majeure season.
We were going to do Force Majeure. Yeah. Our dream cast for him was Matt Berry.
Matt Berry.
Yeah.
It was a Force Majeure.
Oh, there he is.
Picture that with Matt Berry's voice. Don't you wish it didn't happen? We didn't get canceled.
Dear God, I want to live in the timeline that season got made. But I feel they were able to give all the major characters their due, while wrapping up the story set up at the end of Season 7, while revealing new lore for the show, while having its own coherent plot in a way that delivered a satisfying end for fans. It was able to achieve this because they wrote the story from the ground up to maximize their limitations, making the painful but necessary choice to get rid of everything they've written before.
I had an easier time than you did. Like you had to create more stuff from scratch than I did because I was able to use a lot more of my pieces. Because I was writing out like Hank's story. And I was only like one episode into.
I lost everything.
What would have been a whole season arc for him on the road and having stupid adventures.
It's infinitely worse than that.
Most of the issues this season has stem from it trying to bite off more than it can chew, both in the time it has to tell the story and the resources it has to tell it. Something that would have been fixed if Bernie and Matt took the same approach as Doc and Jackson did for the Venture Brothers movie. Okay, so on to the minor issues I had with the season. I do want to stress that these are minor problems. None of these in isolation break restoration for me. They're just little issues I want to highlight. Seeing as I was just talking about the limited resources, the animation in Machinima felt off. Like I just went over, it's not the fault of the people involved with the production. They did as good of a job as they could given what they had. My complaints are actually more directed at Matt and Bernie, as I just went over in the previous section. In terms of the Machinima, I mean it's good. The puppeteering, head bobbing, and camera work was all well done. I just don't like the look of Infinite. I also think getting used to seeing these longtime characters in a new game engine at the same time you're supposed to be saying goodbye to them didn't help. But that's just me. Speaking of things that didn't look or feel right.
Are you ready? It's Retro Convention 17.
So this was actually the first thing that I pitched at Matt was this bit with Retro Convention.
What? They probably could have cut this whole sequence, and not only would the story not lose anything, but it would have actually been better off without it. None of the jokes are funny, the animation really looks bad, and it doesn't do anything for the story. If they wanted to open the season on some comedic bit, they could have just extended the first scene with the Reds being the Reds. It doubles as both a way of reintroducing the characters and starting the season off on a comedic note. Given your limited runtime, you have to be more efficient with your time. Using opportunities to kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone in terms of writing would be wise. The time and resources used to make this scene could have been used to elevate the other animated sequences. Also, doing a parody of convention culture, quote unquote, from Rooster Teeth in 2024 is weird. Both because pop culture conventions have been around for decades, and the fact that Rooster Teeth themselves have been to them basically since they started. They had a booth at San Diego Comic-Con as far back as 2005. They even had their own convention, RTX, that started in 2011.
Oh, this is last year's RTX. There's humor and truth. There is.
Why was the final season of your 21-year-long web series in 2024 the time you wanted to do a surface-level parody of convention culture? Speaking of a joke that feels outdated.
Yeah, so the security team works from home now. It's kind of a remote gig.
The work from home joke could have been cut too. Or at the very least, cut down.
Does the work from home stuff still play in mid-2024?
Nope. This joke has been done already and is about 3 or 4 years out of date. If you've got nothing new to add to it, it's probably best not to do it. Just cut the joke and have the reason it was easy for the Reds and Caboose to enter be because the meta killed everyone beforehand. If they really wanted to make a work from home joke so bad, move it to the start and have the joke be that Griff is working from home. The joke would work better because it would be within Griff's character to take advantage of something like this. In fact, I'm surprised they didn't make the work from home joke with Griff. It seems so obvious. Another thing that didn't feel right was the fact that Caboose didn't sound like Caboose. It's not the fault of the guy they got to replace Joel, as he did as good of a job as he could. There's some times where he sounds close.
Okay, beat it! Psst. Bye, Griff. I will actually miss you, but don't worry, I won't tell anyone. That's okay. You guys weren't very good at it anyway.
But it's never close enough for me to stop noticing it every time he speaks.
We're decided to help you guys.
No! I just need you to help me remember.
It's just such a unique voice that it could only ever sound right coming from Joel.
I know that voice. Sarge, it's me, your old-time best friend.
They apparently did reach out to him about returning, but he rejected it.
In fact, people accused us of replacing Joel, the guy who plays Caboose.
That's right, and we did replace Joel, but the voice filter's the same, actually, surprisingly. That was the difference there. Joel, sorry we didn't tell you about you being replaced yet, but you had to find out sometime, and the commentary was the best way we could think to do it.
I don't really want to get into why Joel might not have come back, mainly because we don't really know specific details about why he left on such bad terms.
Goodbye, friend.
While we're talking about a staple of the show not returning, it sucks that there's no Trocadero music, except for the end. You can definitely sense something's missing without their involvement. It's like Marty no longer making music for Halo, it's just not the same. And as much as I love bashing Rooster Teeth for doing and saying stupid shit, I can't entirely blame them here. If they truly had a tiny budget, it makes sense that they probably couldn't afford everyone who has contributed music to the show, nor do I feel the story really called for that. Sucks they couldn't work out a fee that would allow them to contribute to the final season. And the last thing I really want to highlight is, why no Donut? Like I was saying about Tucker, if this is truly the final season, it's a bummer not to get to see or hear from him one last time, outside of this one name drop.
Then I'll call Admiral Donut myself.
And this one line that isn't even him.
Check it out, Simmons. I got a cheerleader outfit. Woohoo!
You can tell he was probably in an early version of the script. The moment where Simmons throws the capture unit had to be a Donut payoff originally.
Man, that girl's got a really good arm. That nerd has a really good arm. Nice arm.
It would have been a cool long-term payoff too. Since the original time he threw something was the grenade at Tex killing her, then here he would be throwing the capture unit at Tex, helping her. Then, for some reason, when they decided to cut Donut, they gave the payoff to Simmons, due to it being a very important story beat that also leads into another callback. Don't know why they decided to cut Donut, maybe to focus the story more? But to me, he was just as much a part of the group as anyone else. He arrived the same episode as Caboose, and he's considered a mainstay. Donut getting the pink armor was the idea Red vs. Blue originally got built around.
It started as what, a 6-episode miniseries we were gonna do, you know, with like a guy who ends up in pink armor was the big joke at the end of it all, and it just kept going.
Without Donut, there would be no RVB. Just really sucks he couldn't make it in the final season.
Donut has to be my favorite character throughout the
Yep.
history of Red vs. Blue.
Yep.
The stuff he did was so funny.
Yeah.
Moving on to the things I actually liked about Restoration, I thought Caboose and everything involved with what he did was pretty cool and led to an awesome payoff I didn't see coming for multiple reasons. Just a shame he wasn't played by Joel. Caboose, at first, seemed to be repeating what he did in Season 7, even having the Reds help him like they did back then, using the memory unit and a spare robot body while telling its stories to recreate church. Except this time he decides to bring back...
Hey there, cockbites.
Tex? Wow. I did not see that coming.
Yep, they brought back Tex. And not just the character using the voice filter played by Bernie.
Shut up and fight.
Nice voice box, Optimus.
They actually got Kathleen Zelch to reprise the role, who, like Joel, had her own controversy with Rooster Teeth, making tweets calling out Bernie's wife or something like that.
I really liked everything about the tech stuff in this, and
yeah,
it's great to have Kathleen back.
Yeah.
So not only was it a shocking reveal based on the plot misdirection, but also because I'd assumed Kathleen would never be back as Tex. Wait, now that I think about it, how did Church know how to instruct Caboose up until this point? Didn't he say Caboose was too unpredictable to calculate how to respond to him?
I can't predict how to communicate with Caboose. I cannot accurately model what the hell is going on between those two ears. It's like the universe's greatest encryption. It can't be cracked.
Sorry, this is supposed to be the part that I liked. So the fact that we got to see Tex, voiced by Kathleen, involved in an action sequence, even if it's not as intense as the Monty stuff, and to get to see her and Carolina team up was really cool as a longtime fan. But wait, how did Tex get sucked into the capture unit at the end? If it could effectively suck in AI somehow from that distance, why didn't Simmons and Griff activate it? You know what? Never mind. Stay positive. These are the things I liked. Caboose at the end having to make the hard, but necessary, decision to destroy the memory unit was a great final arc for him to have.
Goodbye, Church.
Holding on to the memory of those who are no longer here is important, like the end of Wash's story highlights, but it's also important to move on from them too, and not be obsessive trying to recreate them, like the director, who created an AI based on him, then split it into fragments, hoping to recreate the memory of his dead wife, which it did. But the AI ended up creating a fragment that turned into a recreation of itself. And that fragment then recreated another version of his dead wife, which then had to deconstruct itself into fragments, which, again, led to the memory of the wife coming back. Again, by Caboose destroying the memory unit, he is breaking the cycle that keeps repeating and finally allowing the memories of Church and Tex to rest. So there's that. Then there's, let's see. I brought up Tex and Carolina working together to fight the meta. I like getting Church back, even if he was just recordings left behind. Kinda like what Delta did in Season 6, leaving Church a message in Caboose's head. I thought the campfire scene where Caboose, Simmons, and Griff reminisce was a great in-universe way to look back at the series. I enjoyed the scene at the end with all the freelancers. Thought it was a great way to wrap up Wash and the freelancer stuff one last time. I liked the final scene between Griff and Caboose. A nice little exchange to end the show on. And, yeah. Those are the things I liked. Thought they were good. Thumbs up. So, after all I've gone over, fumbling the main villain, useless subplot, major character death, and all the other flaws, would I recommend the season? Yes. Maybe not at the $15 price point, rent it, or whatever way you can get access to it. If you like watching the behind the scenes stuff,
like me,
then I would recommend getting the iTunes version. It comes with what you would basically get on a DVD or Blu-ray. As I've gone over plenty, this season ain't perfect, far from it, but I feel it's worth checking out at least once if you're a longtime fan of the show. Definitely leaves a better taste in your mouth than the previous seasons. This, and all the content surrounding it, is probably the best Rooster Teeth has put out in a while.
Yeah, I like this early stuff.
This feels too corporate.
What's funny is that this short video of the four of them playing Halo together one last time is way more wholesome and genuine than anything recently. The best way to sum up the season would be a lot of great ideas that both the writing and the limited production failed to support properly. There's a lot about this season I could pick apart. Like, why didn't they just have it so that Church actually did hide the fragment of himself that would contain his memories in Caboose's helmet? It would make more sense why the meta is after him, and how Caboose is able to bring back Tex. But overall, I'm glad they made Restoration. It was cool seeing Matt, and especially Bernie, get heavily involved in the show again. I was convinced it was never going to happen. After he was advertised to contribute one of the stories in season 14, and it never actually happening, I was sure we were never going to see Bernie involved in the writing of the show like he was. But I guess seeing the show he created, that the entire company was built on, slowly fading into irrelevancy due to its quality being diminished thanks to
the millennial hacks that have taken over my show!
Interesting enough, that's sort of by design though, right?
After the failure of Zero, and whatever the hell Family Shatters was supposed to be, it seemed Rooster Teeth had no plans for any major RVB content and were probably going to let it slowly die on its own, and instead of letting the poor thing rot away miserably.
Well, that's why I went back, right? You and I talked a long time about it because of the state of the show where it was, and it was just clearly not, it was just going to kind of fade out from where it was. So I went back and worked on it and wanted to give it a nice little bow, like I said, love letter to the fans, and give some closure to some of the characters that we had seen for literally decades at this point.
He decided to step up and send it out with some dignity. And for that, thank you, Bernie. It's what needed to be done. You created the show, put your love into it, shepherded, tried your best to set it up for success, and in the end, you have to be the one to kill it. Ain't that a bitch?
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.
And mash that bell.